Welcome, Gloria. Welcome, Emily. I'm promoting you to panelists so you're able to unmute yourself and ask questions or make comments during the lesson today. As a panelist, you can still keep your video off, but it will allow you to be able to participate verbally. So feel free to accept the invitation. Hi, Rabbanit, Adina, Sternberg. Hi. Okay, so welcome everyone. So good to have you with us. Happy to be learning again. This is the final session of the Poetics of Mishnah, a methodological approach with Rabbi Dr. Avi Walfish and Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg. They were alternating weeks in teaching the class, and today we have Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg teaching. This class is part of Zrisha ongoing Mishnah project dedicated to the memory of a great lover and student of Mishnah, Rivka Rosenwein, Zichronah Livracha. Just a couple reminder on how we run the classes. I'm sending an invitation to become a panelist to everyone who joined. If you do accept the invitation, you'll be able to unmute yourself when the instructor invites questions or verbally participate. You can still keep your video off, but of course, we would love to see your face if you're able to turn your video on. Please, just a reminder to stay muted when you're not actively speaking, because we want to avoid background noises during the class, and we want to take advantage of the lecture without distractions. Simply unmute whenever you'd like to speak. If you are here with us on Zoom, you can engage also in the chat box. You can write comments and questions there. And same as if you're watching us live on Facebook, you can participate through comments there as well. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbanit Sternberg. Oh, just
okay. Hi.
Okay, perfect. I'll make you a co-host.
Thank you. I moved. I hope my internet connection will be better. If not, I'll try to change it in the middle. Okay. I hope it's.
It sounds great now.
Okay, wonderful. But before I couldn't hear you, so I understood I needed to move. Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome back. Kind of exciting to finish a course. I think today, the topic of today is a midrash inside the Haggadah within the halacha of the Mishnah, but we will be employing all kinds of literary tools that we've been using in the past few weeks and see how things start coming together. So today we're going to learn the third chapter of Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Some of you may be already prepared before. I hope we sent out the right source sheet this time. I'm going to share the screen. 1 second. Okay. And we can see the Mishnah. I brought here the third chapter of Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Excuse me. And we're going to first go over it, try to see what's going on here. I also brought the first Mishnah of the next chapter, which will help us later on. And we're going to, I already, colored everything, noticed all kinds of semantic fields and words that repeat themselves. But first we're going to read the chapter, and then we'll try to think together what is the rationale in terms of the structure, and then we'll continue from there. So we're starting with the first Mishnah. Ra'uhu veit din, v'chol Yisrael, נחקרו העדים, ולא הספיקו לומר מקודש, עד שחשיכה, הרי זה מעובר. So it feels like we're entering in the middle of the topic. And the truth is, we are indeed entering in the middle of the topic, because the past two chapters have been dealing with sanctifying the new month. When people see the new moon, they're supposed to come to the Beit Din, to the court, and testify that they saw the new moon, and then we know that it's Rosh Chodesh, that it's a new month. So this Mishnah actually belongs, supposedly, with the previous chapters, and we'll need to ask ourselves why it is here. But in terms of what the Mishnah is talking about, we're talking about a case where the court itself saw the new moon, maybe they even had time to ask the witnesses and interrogate them, but they didn't have the time to say that this month starts now, that this is a day, the holy day of the new moon. Okay? They didn't have time to say Mekudash, and it already became dark, kind of like a Cinderella syndrome, right? You here's the chimes, the bells ringing. So today's not going to be Rosh Chodesh. It's going to go over to the next day. It's going to be a leap Chodesh. What happens if there aren't any witnesses, but the court itself sees the new moon? So you take two out of the court, and that will be the witnesses that will testify, and then they can sanctify, say mekudash, mekudash, sanctified, sanctified. If our whole court is made up of only three people, יעמדו השניים ויעמידו ויושיבו מחבריהם אצל היחיד ויעידו בפניהם. So we'll make up a new court where we'll take two people from the outside, join with one of the people who saw the new moon. They become our new court of three, and the two left over will become the witnesses. ויאמרו מקודש מקודש שאין היחיד נאמן על ידי עצמו. So we always have to have two witnesses, and therefore we'll need to get another two to consist of our court. So up till now, we've been talking about sanctifying the new month, or the new day of the new month. And now we continue to the next Mishnah. I apologize that I didn't write the numbers of the Mishnaic, but you'll follow with me. Now we're really turning to Rosh Hashanah, even though it's not quite clear yet. Kol hashofarot, we're over here, kol hashofarot kshirim. All kinds of shofarot are fit for blowing, chutz mishel para, except for the horn of a cow. Mifnei shehu keren, it's called a horn, it's called a keren. Amar Rabbi Yosei, v'halo chol hashofarot nikreu keren. What do you mean? All of the types of horns are called keren. Sheneemar bimshoch bekeren hayovel. When they sound, the sound of the long blast of the keren of the yovel. Yovel is a ram, but I want you already to notice the word yovel, because here's a yovel somewhat parallel to a shofar. It's a kind of a shofar. So we're talking about which shofarot are kosher, from which animals. We continue to the next Mishnah, shofar shel Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so now, finally, we've got into Rosh Hashanah. And now we're talking about the shofar of Rosh Hashanah. Shel Yael Pashut. Pashut means that it's straight. Yael means it's an ibex. Ufiv metzupe zahav. Its mouth is plated with gold. Ushtei chatzotzot min hatzdadim. On the sides are two trumpets. Shofar ma'arich v'chatzotzot mekatzrot. Shemitzvat hayom b'shofar. So the shofar blows a longer sound, whereas the trumpets make a shorter sound, because today is the mitzvah of the shofar. By the way, those of you who I can see, if you could raise your hand, any of you, if this is the way you do it in your community. Do you have an ibex shofar which is plated with a little bit gold and two trumpets on the side? No, interesting. Why not? Clear Mishnah says that you need to have a trumpets together with a shofar that needs to be plated with gold. So why don't you do that?
I don't know why my temple doesn't do it. It definitely is a beautiful shofar, but I've never seen the gold, it plated with gold.
Okay, I'll just tell you a little secret. I have never, ever met anyone who they do this in their shul, okay? The reason is, what's the reason? What would you say? Okay, so I'll tell you the reason. The reason is it's not talking about a shul.
Right.
It's talking about the mikdash. It's talking about how you blow the shofar in the mikdash, okay? Even though they didn't say it, but it's pretty clear, okay, that we're not talking about what anybody does in their own community, but what was done in the mikdash, and I want us to remember this for later. Okay, let's continue to the next Mishnah. Bring it up a little bit. Okay, Bataniyot. Taniot, meaning we're talking about fast days that the community or the public fast days. Besheles charim kfufim. You also blow the shofar, just this time it's a ram's horn, and it's bent, it's folded, okay? Second, curved. Ufihen mitzupe kesef, their mouths were plated with silver. Ushtei chatzutzrot be'emtza, this time the two trumpets are in the middle. I always find this Mishnah very funny, because if you have two trumpets in one shofar, it's kind of funny to say that the trumpets are in the middle, right? But when they say that it's in the middle, what they're saying is that's the main thing, that's the center, okay? Shofar mekatzer v'chatzutzrot ma'arichot shemitzvat hayom b'chatzutzrot. So the shofar blast, a short blast, but the trumpets have a long blast, and the long blast because the mitzvah of the day is the trumpets. Okay, so this is talking about public fast days, not Rosh Hashanah. Let's continue to the next Mishnah. Okay, just bringing it up a little bit. Okay, Shaveh Yovel leRosh Hashanah. Remember, we already talked about Yovel. So we're saying that the Yovel is similar to Rosh Hashanah. Just this time, the Yovel is not the name of a kind of a horn, but the Yovel is a Jubilee year. And it is similar to Rosh Hashanah, Latki'ah v'labrachot, meaning for the shofar blasts and for the blessings that are recited together with them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, beRosh Hashanah tokim b'shel zcharim, u'vayovlot b'shel ye'elim. So let me just stop a second before I translate. We previously said that on Rosh Hashanah, you need to blow the shofar with an ibex shofar. So now we hear that the ibex shofar is both for Rosh Hashanah and for the Jubilee year. I'll say something about it in just a second. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no. On Rosh Hashanah, we use the ram horn, b'shel zcharim. And only on the Jubilee year do we use the ye'elim, the ibex. Okay. What are we talking about when we're talking about blowing the shofar on the Jubilee year? What does this have to do with anything? So we'll see later the verses, but on the Jubilee year, it says that you sanctify the 50th year by blowing the shofar. So it says that you blow the shofar on the 50th year. So we're comparing here the shofar of the 50th year to the shofar of Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we'll get back to that later. Right now, we're just sort of collecting our information, going through the Mishnah, so we have what to discuss afterwards. Next Mishnah. Shofar shenisdak vedibko. You have a shofar, it was cracked, and now you glued it together. Pasul. If you do that, then it's unfit. That's how they translate pasul, unfit. Dibek shivrei shofarot, if you take different fragments of a shofar and you glue it together, also pasul. Okay, well, obviously, if just gluing together a crack is already unfit, so definitely if you just put a whole bunch of pieces together. Nikevu stamu, what happens if it's not a crack, it's just a little hole, it was punctured? If it impedes the blowing, pasul. So it depends on whether or not the puncture or the filling in of the puncture, if that has an effect on the blowing of the shofar. Okay, and then it would be fit or unfit. Let's go to the next Mishnah. Second. Okay. Hatokeh letoch haבור, or letoch hadut, or letoch hapitas. So one sounds the shofar into a pit or a cistern or a large jug. Im kol shofar shama yatsa, v'im kol havara shama lo yatsa. So if he hears the blow of the shofar itself, the sound of the shofar itself, he has fulfilled his obligation. But if he only hears the echo, then he doesn't fulfill his obligation. Before I continue this Mishnah, why would somebody want to blow into a pit or a cistern or a large jug? Why would somebody want to do that? Can you have any ideas? Why would try to think about a pit, blowing into a pit? Any ideas? You can write it in the comments or you can say out loud.
Were they hiding the blowing? They didn't want people to know. They didn't want to make it public.
Okay, that's a good start.
I'm not sure. I don't know if it would work, but yeah. I mean,
okay.
Wait, what was the question? Why
would somebody blowing into a pit?
Oh, I guess the echo comes back at you.
Yeah, the problem is the echo. But why would I want to do it initially? Why would I think of blowing into a pit? Why wouldn't I just blow in my home without a problem?
Where were people?
Maybe it's dangerous. Maybe it's dangerous.
Okay, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you write it in the comments?
Joseph in the pit, or
sure.
Like
you're thinking Joseph in the pit? Okay. So I'm just going to add that according to a whole bunch of scholars, this is reminiscent of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, where people would hide, right? It's dangerous. So they would hide, in the tunnels and in the pits. And we really have here sort of like a glimpse into history where people had to hide or conceal the shofar blowing. I might think that even into a cistern or even into, a jug, you want to hear it, but you don't want people outside to hear it. So you're sort of trying to muffle the sound. The problem is if you muffle it too much, then you're not hearing the shofar itself. Okay, so this Mishnah, which on one hand gives us a glimpse into history, it also gives us a glimpse into the future, because this Mishnah is very, very important for modern day halacha, for questions of microphones, radio, all kinds of things like that, where you don't hear the sound, you hear some kind of echo or amplifying, etc. Okay, so let's continue. Anyway, what we said is you have to hear the sound of the shofar and not the echo. The v'chen here is very interesting. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it. V'chen mi shaya over achorei beit hakneset, או שהיה ביתו סמוך לבית הכנסת, ושמע קול שופר או קול מגילה, אם כיוון ליבו יצא, ואם לאו לא יצא. So we have a certain kind of comparison between cases in which a person hears something, and in some cases he fulfills his obligation, in some cases he doesn't. In the previous case, he fulfilled it if he heard the sound directly, but not in echo. This time, we're talking about a person whose house is near shul. Okay, now we've gotten to shul, right? Up till now, we've been talking about, or previously we talked about the shofar in the mikdash, but now we're talking about a shofar in shul. And someone passes by the shul and he hears the shofar. But here it depends on whether or not he mechavenet libo, whether or not he is focusing his heart. Okay, if he isn't, he'll be yotze, he'll be fulfilling the obligation, and if not, then he won't. Even though a person who focused his heart heard, and a person who didn't focus his heart heard, both of them heard the sound, so it really depends on whether or not you focus your heart. How would you translate, how would you understand focusing one's heart? What does that mean? Directing the heart.
It could possibly mean having an intention.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. That's, I think, so the most basic understanding is having an intention to be part of the story, right? It's not an incidental hearing, it's an intentional hearing. Wonderful. Now we continue to the next Mishnah, which might actually sound more familiar to some of you, right? And it's definitely a nice break in all these halachot. Okay, Sal is commenting that there's a certain comparison here between the Megillah and the shofar, that both of them are focusing on a person's hearing, but when the Mishnah puts them together, this reminds us of what we learned 2 weeks ago, it's sort of giving context also to the Megillah. Okay, so the next Mishnah is this. So we're talking about the story of Moshe and the people of Israel battling against Amalek in Shmot Yud Zayin. And the story was that when he raised his hands, they would win, and when he put down his hands, they would lose. And then the Mishnah asks, what's the connection between the hands and the war and the battle? Do the hands create this battle? Do these hands make war? What is it coming to teach us? So it tells you that every time you looked up, like the hands, then they would okay, they would subject their hearts to their Father in heaven, and then they would prevail. But if they didn't, then they would fall. עשה לך שרף, ושים אותו על נס, והיה כל הנשוך, וראה אותו וחי. So this is another biblical story. The biblical story tells about the people of Israel who were complaining that they had enough with all this disgusting food in the desert, or halechem akelokel, they don't like the manna anymore. And God got angry at them. He said, you know what, you don't need me, I'm going. And suddenly they had all these scorpions and these snakes that came to bite them. And when they understood that they were wrong, God said, okay, he told Moshe to make himself a serpent and put it up on a stick, and everybody, whoever would look at it, would live. And now the Mishnah asks, what, the serpent is the one who gives life or takes away the life? So when the people turned their eyes upward and subjected their hearts to their Father in heaven, then they healed, and if not, they rotted. Okay, and then we get to the last part of this Mishnah and the last part of the chapter, and then we go to something totally different. And a mute, an imbecile, and a minor, and motziim et harabim yedei chovatam. Okay, they cannot help the rabbim, the community, to fulfill their obligation. This is a principle. So if you are not obligated to a certain manner, you cannot discharge the obligation on behalf of the community. Okay. We finished the chapter. The next Mishnah is already the next chapter, so we'll deal with that later. But before I continue, let's kind of try to, that's a very good question about the women. That's a very, very good question about the women. If you read the Mishnah as is, it sounds as if women are also below the shofar, which is very, very surprising. Don't worry, the Talmud already will tell us that not. I mean, the halacha, accepted halacha, that women are not obligated and therefore they cannot help others fulfill their obligation. But you were right that in the pshat of the Mishnah, it sounds like women can also, that women aren't excluded. Let's just say it that way, okay? But that is a good question. Okay, so let's go back to the Mishnah itself and try to think, okay, so I've sent out the Mishnah in the beginning of the week. Let's try to think, what is the topic of the Mishnah? What is the title of the Mishnah? What is the structure of the Mishnah? After we deal with the general structure, the general topics, and afterwards we'll start talking about the discrepancies and the problems and how we deal with them, all right? So if you needed to give us a title of this chapter in Mishnah, or try to analyze how was this Mishnah built, or what's the rationale, what would you say? Okay, if you could just take a moment, think about it, and write in the comments. Just give a title to the chapter, and if you can, a word about how it's structured. Okay, I see the handout was sent out again for those who want to scroll on their own on their computer. Okay, I'm waiting for you to write your thoughts on the chat. Okay, so Jennifer wrote, time, tools, place, and intention on Rosh Hashanah. Saul writes, based in authority. Yeah, that's interesting. As a title of our chapter? Hey, Evie just sent again the source sheet for whoever joined now. Yes, Sal, would you like to explain yourself?
Sure. As a title for their main concern, the authority of the Beis Din to structure time and place and the holidays. You're not on your own.
But do you think that addresses all the, or most even, of the topics that are dealt with in the Mishnah? In this
No,
Mishnah, this chapter?
of this Mishnah, no.
No, I want something that addresses a chapter here, just like Jennifer did, which was time, tools, place, and intention in Rosh Hashanah. Okay, but you forgot out one very important word or concept. You forgot the shofar, the blowing, the blasts, right? Okay, yeah, what a blast. Okay. That's very important, right? Sometimes it's interesting, like the Mishnah that talked about all the shofars being kosher didn't talk about Rosh Hashanah. So you talked about Rosh Hashanah, but you forgot to mention the shofar because it was so obvious, right? Sometimes we leave things out just because they are so obvious.
On the other hand, the only thing we have from the Torah about Rosh Hashanah is the shofar. We don't have anything about Rosh Hashanah.
I'll have to what's it called? I'll have to disagree with you. The Torah doesn't say anywhere that you need to blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Absolutely nothing about it. Not nothing. It says zichron truah. We'll talk about it in a few moments, but it actually doesn't say a shofar. It really doesn't.
That's true.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I what a blast is a great title for Mishnah Rosh Hashanah chapter 3. Okay, try to remember it for next time.
I thought you actually said it. I thought you actually said, oh, what a blast. And then oh, there's your title.
Right.
So I didn't think of it by myself. Yeah.
It was a joint effort. Okay, anybody else want to join in the discussion? Try to say what this chapter is dealing with? So I want to work with Jennifer's title, but I want you to notice that the list that you gave isn't exactly the order in which the Mishnah is built. So Emily's adding the nature and role of hearing the shofar. Okay, so you hear from these details something about the nature and also about the so let's try to go one by one and try to see what's going on here. Okay, the first Mishnah I'm going to title right now as a discrepancy. Okay, it's sort of like an incidental topic, even though it's really not incidental because it continues the previous chapters. But as far as our chapter is concerned, it's kind of incidental because it doesn't have anything to do with our chapter. So I'm going to put it on the side a second and sort of ignore it for right now because it's talking about Beit Din and consecrating the new moon. Okay, but let's start with the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is trying to define which shofarot are kosher. Right? So we're talking about, Jennifer, you described it as a tool, right, for the shofar blowing. We're talking about which tools are good. In a sense, this Mishnah, kol shofarot ksherim, when we're talking about which animal, and also the we'll continue discussing the animals and how and the function for a bit, and then we continue to what happens if the shofar has a crack, or if it's broken shofar, or if it's punctured, etc. So we're also talking about the tool itself, right? We're talking, but if we notice, we're talking first about the animal, and sort of then we disconnect it from the animal and we talk about it within itself. What I want you to notice is that when we're in this framework, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can kind of watch how it's going. In this framework, the words that we'll find are kasher, and after kasher, we'll find pasul. Okay? So we're talking about the thing itself. In yeshivish, we would call it the hefza, the object. Okay, we're talking about the object. What do we do with the object? We blow the object, right? We took care of the object, but we're talking about the shofar, the shofar, the shofar, the shofar, the shofar. We're talking again and again about the shofar, and the words that we use are pasul and kasher. Because when we're talking about an object, we can say that the object is fit or unfit. Why am I saying that? Because when we continue, when we go down, okay, 1 second. When we go down, we're going to talk later about not the object itself, but the way it meets the person, or what the person does with this object. So we're going to talk about a person who's tokea, who's blowing it, but then we're mostly going to talk about shomea, right? If he heard, right? In the beginning, we're talking about the thing itself. And then afterwards, we're talking about what the person does with it, man or woman, right? So we're moving from the object to the subject, to how the people use this object. And when we move from the object to the subject, we're moving from using the words kasher and pasul to using the expressions yatsa and lo yatsa. Because yatsa and lo yatsa have to do with fulfilling an obligation, which is something not exactly subjective, but it has to do with the subject. It has to do with how the people do what they're supposed to do. Whereas the shofar itself is not yotze or not yotze, it can be kasher or it can be pasul. So through the words that we use, if we use kasher and pasul, or we use yatsa and lo yatsa, we can see that our focus is shifting from the object to the subject, okay? And we're also shifting from, does it enable the tkiya, to the actual listening of, to what's going on, okay? And, and in a sense, we can also say that we're becoming more and more abstract. We're starting from something very physical, from the animal itself, and then the horn that we take from the animal. And then we're going into the actions, the listening, the blowing, and then the listening. But after we speak of the actions, now we're speaking of something even more abstract, which is the focusing of the heart, kiven libo, which is also something that has to do with the subject, the people. That's what they're doing, but it's something more abstract, right? It's not the listening, which is more physical, but it's something more emotional or mental, kivun halil. So if I just, and later on we go back to this idea of being yotze or not yotze, where again we're talking about the subject who can help others fulfill their obligation, because we're talking about the people fulfilling their obligation. In a sense, we're also moving from the personal person into the community. In a sense, we're also kind of have a certain framework here, where in the beginning we talk about blowing the shofar in the mikdash, and in the end we're talking about blowing the shofar for the community, and we're sort of making a kind of comparison, even if it's just hinted at, between the shofar that's blown in the mikdash for the whole of the community and the shofar that any person might blow in their own community and help other people fulfill their obligations. So, and if I just look at the general topic of this chapter, I'll say we're talking about the blowing of the shofar, or I would say the shofar and the blowing of the shofar, right? But the object of the shofar and the subject that deals with the shofar, or fulfills its obligation through the shofar. But of course, we must say that we've noticed all kinds of things throughout the Mishnah that kind of sort of got stuck in here, and we need to deal with it, right? So we discussed the fact that the first Mishnah has nothing to do with this chapter. It has to do with the previous chapters. I don't know if you noticed, but I sort of went through it quickly, but the Mishnah starts comparing the shofar of Rosh Hashanah to what happens on the public fast days, which includes a shofar and also includes trumpets, but it has nothing to do with Rosh Hashanah. And afterwards, we also compare the Rosh Hashanah to blowing the shofar on the Jubilee year, which is a nice comparison and everything, but we really didn't have to have it as part of this chapter in the Mishnah. So some would call this incidental, tangents, whatever, but these are topics that sort of found their way into the Mishnah, but they really, really don't have to be here. And we need to ask ourselves, okay, so why is it here? And there's one more thing that I want us to notice, and that's where we're going to start. Yeah, I indeed highlighted the seeing and the hearing, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. Highlighting really helps sort of kind of follow what's going on in the chapter. Okay, that's interesting. You're saying is it possible is one possible lesson that intention can come by placing oneself at the right place at the right time. So I think we'll discuss that in just a second, okay? But what I want to focus on now, and we'll also connect to what you just wrote, is the Mishnah that talks about the war against Amalek and the brass serpent. Okay, second. Try to make it smaller just so it would be easier to see on the board. Okay, so we have here two things which are connected. They definitely have to do with one another. These two stories about Moshe raising his hands and the brass serpent, and it kind of found its way into our Mishnah. Now, before we ask ourselves, and I think it's pretty easy to raise all kinds of ideas of what it's doing here, I want us to notice that beside it being sort of an incidental topic, we also have here the joining together of two genres, right? We're talking about halacha. We're in a technical, a legal, if you want, halachic world, normative world, and suddenly we're sort of drifting away and getting into world of agada, of stories, ideas, things that usually we like learning more because they're not so technical and they give us a good feeling. So part of our question is not only why does this appear here, but in general, what is the literary achievement of putting Agadic literature inside the halach? Okay, so now I'm passing over the microphone to you, as long as you unmute yourself, or if you want to write. What are these two stories, two Agadot? Why are they in here? Why did the Mishnah feel a need? Why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, when he compiled the Mishnah, why did he feel that this is the right place to start discussing the story of the war against Amalek and the serpent? Any ideas? Yes, Emily.
So both of the stories relate, religious behaviors, ritual behaviors like shofar, which where a very specific intention is necessary. And in fact, where if it's not very specific, if the intention, if the thoughts, the kavanah is not correct, then it's actually, the rabbis challenge it. Like, if, you're not even allowed to do it. If, and when they say, they challenge, how can, what is it again? How can a nachash, v'chi nachash meimit o nachash mechayeh? Rabbis actually are uncomfortable with it. If you don't have the right, in other words, this is where the right intention is absolutely crucial to the behavior, to the fulfillment. I mean, it's not a halachic thing. It's and maybe that's why the story is necessary. This can this, what I'm saying, can that be expressed in halachic terms, or can only a story? I'm not sure.
Okay, that's a good question.
I also want to I remember that, I can't remember which of the reforming kings actually destroyed that Nachash.
Chizkiah.
So, yeah, because it was serving a different purpose from what it had been intended. It had become avodah zarah. So intention here is really crucial.
Very good. Wonderful. Any other thoughts on the matter?
I
Yes.
think that maybe at the time, the people didn't really understand what was going on. They were looking up because they wanted to see the object, even though deep down what was happening was that it was creating their connection to God. And maybe there's a comparison with the function of the shofar, that we think our intention is to hear the sound, but what it's also doing at the same time is increasing our connection to God.
Okay, very nice. Yes, Michael.
This is not original to me, and I can't remember where I heard it before. So I apologize. I don't know if you're going to go here. But I want to be clear about that. But when I saw it and when it was mentioned to me, the second Mishnah quotes a justification of the type of shofar by quoting from Joshua, which was the shofar acts as magic. The last Mishnah say the shofar has nothing to do with magic. It's intention. And it's just interesting how it shifts there.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I want to take what you're all saying. I think if we put all of what you're saying together, 1 second, let me just read what you wrote in the comments. So Sol writes that Moshe has a direct connection. Chazal tells us to have our own, meaning not the hands, but the heart, right? And Jennifer adds that these two stories seem to highlight the importance of faith, the tools, the rod, the hands, and we're going to add to what you're saying, Jennifer, also the shofar are leading the people to lift their eyes towards God and hands to faith, belief, and trust. Okay, so what you're all saying is, in a sense, what one level of what we're going to talk about in this these agadot are that we're dealing in an agadic way, but and sort of like with a hint, and it's done very, very gently. We're saying some people might think the shofar has magic. Some people might think all you need to do is you blow the shofar and like something there opens up in the sky and then everything is going to be great. I see that kind of notion when you talk about the 13 midot of God. If we just say it, repeat it enough times, then everything's going to be fine, right? There's this certain belief, even if we won't say it out loud or articulate it, that the shofar has a certain kind of, what Michael said, a magic ability. And therefore, just like the shofar, we're talking about the hands of Moses and we're talking about the serpent, and all of them have a potential of, like you said, leading us to avodah zarah, misunderstanding the means for the purpose, thinking that the means of leading us towards God is what heals us. And therefore, we need to remember that it's just a way of looking up towards God. And you noticed that I highlighted the colors. I wanted you to notice that in the beginning, when we're talking about the shofar, we're talking about listening, hearing, right? You hear the shofar, you hear the shofar. Here, we're not talking about hearing. We're talking about a different sense. We're talking about seeing. But if you think about the shofar, it does have this certain something very much similar to the hands, where you're pointing up to the sky. And now I want to remind us of the Mishnah that we saw really at the beginning of the chapter, that also talks of people raising their eyes towards the sky and looking at things that create holiness, that the sky is giving us a message, right? Of course, as Saw, I think, said before, Beit Din has to give it significance, right? Beit Din has to give this upward looking a certain understanding, significance, excuse me, meaning. It's not enough to look, it's not enough to hear. We have to have this added definition, whether when we're looking at the new moon, we're going to define it as defining this new month, and whether we're listening to the shofar and we're defining it as something that connects us to God. Now, after all that is said and done, I want us to notice that we're not only talking here again, the words and the semantics come in. We've been talking about shama, shama, shama. We're talking about the senses, looking and seeing, but I want also to talk about the heart. And I want us to notice that in the previous Mishnah, we talked about the heart. There's a practice of not looking directly at the shofar. I actually don't know. I don't know that practice. Interesting. Maybe it's so we don't get distracted, like the practice of not looking at the Kohanim when they're blessing us, right? There's a certain understanding that it's not them, it's God. Interesting, I don't know. Any case, so I want us to notice that in the previous Mishnah, we talked about focusing one's heart. And that led us to discussions about intention. But in this Mishnah, we're not talking about focusing the heart, we're talking about subjecting the heart. Misha'abdim et libam. What's the difference between lechaven et halev and lesha'abed et halev? Is it the same thing? We notice we're talking about the heart. I put them all in pink, right? Because hearts go with pink. We're talking about the heart, but we're talking about different subjects. In one of them, we're mechaven, we're focusing, and in one of them, we are subjecting, mishabed. What's the difference? Is there a difference?
Mishabdim goes further in describing a relationship. In other words, Kavanah is directing us to God. Mishabdim is specifying a certain kind of relationship to God.
Wonderful. So the Mishnah is kind of playing with us. Why is it playing with us? Because we're taking the heart. And in one Mishnah, we're talking about the intention, the focusing, the heart, the direction. But in the next Mishnah, we're supposedly talking about something else. We're talking about the hands, we're talking about the serpent, whatever. But we're still talking about the heart. And in this time, we're talking about subjecting the heart. And this is one way how inserting a gada into the halacha has an impact, okay? So one way was adding meaning to the shofar, right? Dealing with theoretical and philosophical questions of what exactly does a shofar do. And we're giving you a story on the side, just so you know, the shofar is not magic. The shofar is something that's intended to, bring us to God. But there's also something else. It's not only adding meaning, but I think it's adding something else. It's saying, you know what? When we're talking halacha, what I can expect of you is to direct your heart, to focus your heart. That halachically is what I can expect of a person. But when I go to Agada, I'm not expecting people to focus their heart. I'm expecting people to subject their heart. Or as Emily said, this is much more severe, intense, a relationship. So when I put this Agada together with halacha, I didn't, Rebbe did, but when we see this together, sort of like the Agada is saying, I know I asked you to focus your heart, but there's another level that you can get to if you subject your heart. Meaning that in a sense, when we put Agada together with halacha, we say there's only a certain amount of expectations that I can put on you when we're talking halacha. But when I'm in Agada, I can go in a whole different realm. I don't expect it of everyone, and therefore I can't put it into our normative description, but I can put it next to it. And I can put it as certain, something you can aspire to, as something you can hope for, something that is in your view, but it doesn't obligate you yet. So in a sense, this is a way where the Agada doesn't just add to the meaning of the halacha or help you refine what the halacha is talking about. It also gives you another way to look at halacha, to another something that you can aspire to, even if I don't obligate you. Okay? Because we're used to in our world in our world, we're used to this idea that whatever is normative, that's all there is. It's either law or not law. And the putting Haggadah together with halacha says we can have higher expectations of you, even if we can't make you do it, kind of thing. Yes, Jennifer.
You know, I can't help but think, this reminds me, this is the tiniest bit off topic, but this was just brilliant. Thank you to you all for the intention and what's the word you used, which was so to intention, and you just to subject. It reminds me of when someone says God forbid, desperately ill, and well, your intention is to send them this or whatever, but to subject your heart to that fear, or that is a whole nother level, and that's what it reminds me of. I wish I could think of a happier way, but to leave yourself vulnerable to, it's not just a matter of doing the right thing. Exactly. And the heartfelt
and
thing,
that,
but
yeah, and it's not always something you can expect of everyone, right? To be vulnerable, to open your heart, right? It's something that you want, you aspire, but you can't force. Right? And the source sheet, for those of you who got it, I gave 2 more examples of how halacha can be supplemented by Agada. I'm not going to go into them because we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to look at one of them. That is, one second. Try to get there. A Mishnah in Sukkah. Mishnah in Masechet Sukkah talks about when can one leave his sukkah. Okay, so over here, so for 7 days, a person renders his sukkah as his permanent residence, and his house is a temporary residence. If the rain falls, when are you allowed to vacate the sukkah? When a congealed dish will spoil, right, which happens pretty quickly. Okay, a parable where it's told. What is this similar to? What is this comparable to? So it's like a servant who comes to pour wine for his master, and he pours a jug of water in his face, or he pours that jug into his face. We can find different explanations. Okay, so here again we have Agada and halacha. In the halacha, we're told something very technical. You're eating in your sukkah and it rains, so you can go in your home. That's a very technical, normative statement as to your obligation regarding the sukkah. What does the Agada come to add? Why are we comparing this to a servant who comes to, pour a cup for his master? Because it's giving us another way of looking at the situation. It's true that if it rains, you can go in your home. My father, he used to work in a place where there wasn't a sukkah. So what he would do was he would wait for it to rain, and then he would go eat, right? Because now you don't need to be in a sukkah. What's the Mishnah telling him? That's a nice idea halachically, but agadically, you need to understand that God is saying that he doesn't like what you're doing. Meaning there's a certain friction or tension between what the halacha says you can do and what you're supposed to feel about it. Okay? Halacha says you can go it in your home, but the Agada says, yeah, but still, that's not something you're waiting for. That's not something you're aspiring for. You want to pray for God not to have rain in your sukkah. I don't know if it's different in Israel and in America. In America, rain means different things than it does in Israel. But still, there's a certain aspect that the Agada can add, which the halacha can't, because the halacha just says you're allowed, you're not allowed, what you need, what you don't need, and the Agada can add what's right and what we need to aspire to. It gives us like a whole new level of understanding what God wants of us, right? There's what God demands of us, and there's what God wants of us, and these are 2 separate levels. In the few minutes that we have left, I want to just talk a little bit about other topics that were put into our Mishnah. Right? Now, when we see a Gada embedded into the Mishnah, it's really easy to say, obviously, there is a message here. Obviously, these Agadot were picked for the moral of the story. That's easy because it's sort of like it shouts out at you, right? It's a blast, like we would say. But when you just have sort of like these incidental topics, it's hard to notice it because we're still in the world of halacha, just halacha that sort of feels like it's irrelevant or what is it doing here? But my claim, and I think this is what Rav Avi is also claiming, is that just like putting a gada in the halacha is a literary tool, putting incidental topics into halacha is another literary tool, which comes to add meaning. So what incidental topics did we have here? We had the sanctifying of the new moon. So we talked about the connection between the new moon and the shofar, but we also have these comparisons between the shofar of Rosh Hashanah and the trumpets of the public fast days and the shofar of the Jubilee. Okay, and sort of we added into here a whole bunch of topics which are connected because we can compare, but the question is, why is this here? And what I would like to suggest is that these topics are trying to hint to us what exactly is the role of the shofar. Okay, some of you talked about the topic of the title of our chapter is what is the role and significance of the shofar. So what can we say about this? I want us to look at the verses. Okay. So I mentioned that if you look at the verses of the in the Tanakh, in the Torah, actually we have no idea what Rosh Hashanah is supposed to be. It doesn't tell us really much about Rosh Hashanah, right? What does it tell us? וידבר השם אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל בחודש השביעי באחד לחודש, יהיה לכם שבתון זיכרון תרועה מקרא הקודש. כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו, והקרבתם אישה אל השם. So God says to Moses, what does he say? On the 7th month, on the first day, you shall have a day of complete rest, a sacred occasion, right? Mikra Kodesh, commemorated with loud blasts. So we have Tru'ah and we have Zikaron, a certain kind of commemoration, right? Okay, who's commemorating? Who's supposed to commemorate? And what exactly are we?
People?
What?
The Israelite people?
What does that mean, commemorating them? Okay, Zikaron has to do with memory, with awareness, with like taking something into consideration. But who is supposed to? If you look at it, we have two sources. We have more, but just for now, because we have only 3 minutes, we have different sources which we can go to try to understand what is Zichron Tru'ah and what exactly we're supposed to do. So one of the sources that we'll find in the Gemara is the source that deals with the Jubilee. Okay, 1 second. I'll raise this a bit. I want to be able to see you and see the board at the same time, so it makes it a little bit complicated. Okay, what happens in the Jubilee? Okay, Okay. וידבר השם אל משה בהר סיני לאמור. So God talks to Moshe, דבר את בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, talk to the people of Israel, כי תבואו אל הארץ אשר אני נותן לכם, ושבתה הארץ שבת להשם. So you have seven, you're going to have a year where the land has a Shabbos. וספרתי לך 7 שבתות שנים, 7 שנים, 7 פעמים. You count 7 times 7, והיו לך ימי 7 שבתות השנים, 49 שנה. So after 49 years, והעברת שופר תרועה בחודש השביעי בעשור לחודש ביום הכיפורים, תעבירו שופר בכל ארצכם. So in the 7th month, just like Rosh Hashanah, this time on Yom Kippur, then you need to blast the horn, right? וקידשתם את שנת ה-50 שנה, וקראתם דרור בארץ לכל יושביה. So what are you doing? You're announcing to all the people that they need to let go of their servants and let go of the land that you've been holding on to. So who is the shofar blowing for? Who is supposed to listen to the shofar? We are, to understand and remember that God is our king. We worship him, and therefore we cannot make our brothers and sisters slaves. Okay? But we can also compare this to psukim, verses that talk about the trumpets. The trumpets talk about the fact that when there's a war in the land, so if there's a war, you blow the trumpet and you're going to be remembered before God, and then he will help you. On happy days, then you'll blow the trumpets, together with the sacrifices. So when do we use the trumpets? When we're worried and there's a war, or when we're happy. But in any case, we want God to think about us. We want God to favor us. So we're turning to God and asking him for help and to continue his grace over us. So what I want to say, again, we don't have time to go into it, is that there are two different sources, possible sources that we just saw for what is the idea of the shofar. Does it have to do with the shofar of the Jubilee year, where we're telling the people to remember that there's only one deity that we serve, and therefore we need to let go of our servants? Or are we turning to God and asking him to remember us and favor us? These are two options of what is zichron teruah. When the Mishnah addresses both the trumpets of our public fasts, of when we have a hardship, and the shofar of the Jubilee, sort of saying we have two different ways of looking at the topic. So we're just comparing. We're not talking about it a lot, but we're just putting these two subjects inside and saying, when you think about shofar, remember the Jubilee. When you're thinking about shofar, remember the trumpets. We have these two options, competing options, as to what the shofar is. So here we have something that's not an agadic tool, but it's a tool of putting not two genres together, but two topics together, and that in itself also adds to the significance. So if we finish our whole course, the whole point of the course was to, follow the words, the semantics, the structure, and the ideas embedded inside through different texts in order to get to the meaning and understanding of what the topic is. And that's it for now. I already took 2 minutes away from your time, so I apologize. And thank you all for your listening and your participation.
It was fantastic. Thank you. Can't wait to learn from you again.
Thank you very much.
Rabbanit Sternberg, would you like to take some more questions now, or
yes,
are we?
I'm happy to take questions. Yes.
Okay, let's just take a few questions then. If anyone has them, feel free to unmute.
One comment.
Yes.
The lave that was being spoken of before for L'chavein and L'shabed could be a different one. Like lave, of course, means the heart that we can see, but it also means the mind, as in the broad biblical swath of meaning. So it could be
Definitely.
that what's being done maybe like a little bit towards the look at the Haggadah is to disambiguate the lave that's being spoken of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good point. Even as we all know that everything comes from the mind, but we differentiate between the mind and the heart. So for Chazal, everything came from the heart, but they would still be able to distinguish between things that are more intention and things that are more emotional and spiritual. Definitely. Any more questions?
Okay, thank you so much.
First, thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbanit Sternberg. First, many thanks to you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today for this last session and the whole session, all of our classes. We really value you as our learning community. Thank you to those who joined us live on Facebook as well. Just a couple announcements. As you know, this was the last class for the term, but we still have plenty classes throughout the week, finishing this fall's man strong. Additionally, Drisha will have a 1-week winter's man later in December. You can learn more and register at winter.drisha.org. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now for you. So you can explore those classes as well. And again, thank you so much, Rabbanit Sternberg, and everyone who joined us today here on Zoom and on Facebook. And I can't wait to see you next time. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy
Sameach.
Hanukkah. Thanks so much.
להתראות. Thank you so much.